I got it. I got it right here. I already got it. Good morning, committee. Good to see everybody. Sorry for the intrusion in here with caucus or calendar, but now we're back to work. So, who's on WebEx? Anybody?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Currently, there is no one on WebEx.
Okay, very good. So, first order of business, I want to introduce a bill, RS 659. Are there any objections? Representative Clayton.
I'd just be curious to know what it is or does beyond the RS number, just because you do neat things and we'd just like to know.
Yeah, good idea. This is an act concerning alcoholic beverages related to spirits distributors, wine distributors, and cereal malt beverage distributors, regulating samples, amending KSA 41306, 41306A, and 41307, and repealing the existing sections.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Committee, are there any other bill introductions? Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No bill introductions, but I don't know if anybody else is having trouble getting hooked up online here so we can get to the server and get our papers, because I can't do it.
Yes, Representative Hauser, members of the committee. We have been in contact with IT, and the Wi-Fi has been giving us issues for the past 2 weeks. As far as I know, they are working on fixing the Wi-Fi. So I would recommend going onto the Kansas Open. That's what I'm doing. It's not as secure, but that's what we're relegated to at this time. If it helps, at the bottom of your screen, there is a date. There should be a microphone, and then there is a Wi-Fi symbol. If you click that, there should be an option there that should go from the ks.gov to the Kansas Open Wi-Fi. So.
What's that?
You can't connect to the S drive open.
Uh-huh. Didn't you also email it out? Committee, we're going to go ahead and try to get on as best you can and follow along. So we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 2058, requiring monthly remittance to gallonage taxes on wine to the Secretary of Revenue by the holder of a special order shipping license. So with that, will the reviser give us a overview of the bill? Oh, I'm sorry. There was another bill. Mike, hang on just a second here. I was looking at the committee and Francis, I didn't see Representative.
Sorry.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to request 23 RS 0813 to the committee. This bill would direct certain revenues from the casinos and lottery that the state receives to those counties that have a tribal casino located in their county for the purpose of helping offset some of the increased costs of law enforcement in those counties due to the casinos being there.
Very good. Committee objections? Seeing none, bill is introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Hyman, the Revisor of Statutes Office. The chairman stole my thunder for the bill because it is a very simple bill. The amendments you see on page 1 are nothing but proofing, editing type things. The change is on page 2, and it provides a monthly instead of quarterly remittance of taxes, gallonage taxes, and so on. So you've got testimony in favor by a couple of different parties today.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions of Mike? Okay, seeing none. Next, we have Tuck Duncan. Tuck, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I have permission to approach the representative and give him a paper copy?
You may.
Us old guys, we still use paper. We're trying to get to digital, but I'm Tuck Duncan, the Kansas Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association. I requested that the introduction of this very lengthy bill, like I say, till the revisor got it, it really only had one word changed, and that's from quarterly to monthly. If I can put it in brief context, because I know you have several bills today. Kansas, as you heard from the director in her briefing to you, is a 3-tier system distribution state. Like most of the licensing states, there are suppliers, there are wholesalers, and there are retailers. And part of the reason for that is there's a $13.50 tax at the federal level on spirits, a $2.50 tax at the state level wholesalers pay. There's an 8% tax that the retail liquor stores collect, all of which goes to the state of Kansas. And then there's a 10% tax on the drink that's collected at the clubs and drinking establishments, of which 75% goes to the counties or the city in which that establishment is located, and 25% goes to the state. And of that 75%, a third is for parks and recs, a third is for the general fund, and a third is for alcohol programs. So tax collection is important in the state of Kansas, and I do a demonstration to the tax committee whenever they threaten to raise those taxes that shows if you take an $11.50 bottle of vodka, it'll generate about $35 in taxes to the state and federal government. So that's the commercial. We're already taxed very well in this state. It also, though, puts into context what this bill is all about. And I'm going through some of this because there are a few new members of the committee, so I regret if I'm repeating myself to some of the more mature members of the committee. Many years ago, after the legislature traveled to San Francisco for a National Conference of State Liquor Administrators meeting and had gone up to Napa, only to find that they could not ship wine back to their homes in Kansas, came back to Kansas and enacted a wine shipping law. That wine shipping law provided that you could have up to 2 cases of wine shipped to you at your home, and from a licensed wine shipper, of which in my testimony I indicated there are over 1,000 of them in the state of Kansas at the current time. And so they would make these quarterly reports, and used to be annual, then it went to quarterly. Then we started finding that there was a lot of seepage, in the sense that there were a bunch of folks who were shipping wine to Kansas consumers, and they weren't filing reports and they weren't paying taxes, and they were going through what was called a fulfillment house. And this is sort of an intermediary, because some of these wineries are very small. They don't have shipping departments, so they send their product over to a fulfillment house warehouse. They take the orders, they ship it to you at your home, but they weren't making any reports. So there was this product coming through the fulfillment house. We were getting reports and from UPS and from FedEx, and they consented to do it electronically on a monthly basis. So we got the wine people shipping, giving us reports quarterly. We have the FedEx folks giving us monthly reports, and finally, 2 years ago, we got the fulfillment houses into the scenario. So now they provide us with wine monthly reports. Well, it's impossible for the ABC to actually figure out who the good, the bad players are because they can't synchronize those reports when you've got one that's quarterly and two that are monthly. And in my testimony, I've indicated that last year we had 166,000 shipments into the state of Kansas. That's shipments. I have emailed to all of you this morning I did some math. I had to go back, put my math hat on, and I've emailed you a little sheet that shows you that last year, there were 1,139,985 bottles of wine shipped into the state of Kansas. That's a lot of wine for 3 million people. And that's the wine we know about. And we know about it because we know what the current gallonage taxes were. And so I took the math. What I did is I took the total dollars of gallonage tax. I divided it out by the light wine and the fortified wine tax rates, came up with the number of cases, came up with the number of bottles. And then I've also sent you, and this is not my product, this is from the folks out of California who benefit the most from wine shipping, obviously. This is their report. The average price per bottle is $45.16, average price. And that's consistent. Some will say, well, maybe that sounds high for Kansas. I can tell you, my wholesalers tell me that the $30 to $40 bottle in Kansas market at the retail store has gone into the dumpster because million bottles of wine, that value being shipped into the state. So the whole point of this discourse is to say to you, we need to have the monthly reporting in order to line everybody up so that we can figure out who is not licensed and who is not paying the tax. Because we know if there's $51 million of retail sales last year of wine to Kansas that we know of, based on a review of the fulfillment reports we did and presented to this committee 2 years ago, there's probably at least half as much of that or more in unreported sales. And this one little word change will help the state identify who the bad actors are. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. I'll be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Tuck. Committee questions. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Tuck, I'm looking at the bill here, and if you look like, what is this? Section 1. No holder of a special order shipping license shall be permitted to ship in excess of 12 cases of wine. Does that mean just, so it doesn't matter who it is, if they got this special deal, they can only ship in 12 cases a year?
Right.
So how many bottles is in a case? 4?
12.
12?
Actually, we used to have some 18 bottle cases, but I haven't seen any of those recently, darn it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, Tuck,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you're
Appreciate
off the hook. Next, we have Deb Beavers, Director from the ABC. Deb, welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Debbie Beavers, ABC Director. There's really not a whole lot that I can add to what Mr. Duncan had to say. This bill is important to us because it will help us identify those unlawful shipments. It's not just shipments of wine that's coming in. We also know that beer and spirits is being shipped in. And I think it's important to point out the fact too that 166,000 shipments were known shipments of alcohol. And we just don't have a way right now to identify that. Currently, with the quarterly special order shipping report with 2 monthly reports, it's about 4 months before we can match 1 month. And it makes it very complicated for us. So this will be very helpful to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Committee questions. Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uh, Just a quick question. So you indicated in your testimony that we had changed it in 2019 from monthly to quarterly. Do you remember why we did that?
It actually was a change from annually. Special order shippers, the wine shippers, were reporting to us annually every year by January the 15th for the whole entire year. So going to quarterly was an improvement, but it's just not enough.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, Tom. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Beavers.
Here, let me start over. Representative Kessler. Okay.
And again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Beavers, thank you for coming here. I just got kind of curious, listening to Mr. Duncan talk. In your experience with your office, kind of the unknown shipments into Kansas, would you say that that estimate is pretty accurate, or does your office actually feel it maybe even higher than what Mr. Duncan has stated?
It could be higher. We just don't know. It's a problem. This is not just a state of Kansas problem. This is a problem across the nation.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you for being here. Very good. Committee will close the hearing on 2058. And we'll open the hearing on 2059. Mike will give us an overview.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is another relatively simple bill. It deals with common consumption areas. The law was passed a few years back that allows cities or counties to establish a common consumption area within the limits of the city or the unincorporated area of the county, and authorize possession and consumption of alcoholic liquor or cereal or malt beverage within the common boundaries, and basically allows people to walk around with a drink in their hand, I believe is a short version of it. What the amendment would do, current law requires that the public streets or roadways be blocked, and the change is on line 16 on page 1. It says may require the public street or roadway to be blocked. And the other change is at the on page 3, and it provides that the boundaries, current law says be marked by a physical barrier or apparent line or demarcation or other, and it just adds appropriate signage. So that's the bill.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Committee questions of the revisor? Seeing none. Thank you, Mike. Okay, next we have the first proponent is Representative Blue. Representative, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. I'm actually happy if you cannot read the testimony because I wrote it during the Chiefs game. So I'm going to apologize for that. But I want to start off by saying this is actually an issue that I've been working on for about a year now, and reached out with ABC, and we were discussing about a year ago, and found out that Whitney Dameron was also working on it, and it even made it easier. And so we had a meeting with ABC over the summer, and I believe that there is a technical cleanup possibly, right? No, just kidding. That's not true. But I haven't talked to them in a while, so I apologize on that. But anyways, maybe that's on another bill. But I want to talk about what happened in Great Bend. So Great Bend has a common consumption district called Final Fridays on Forest, and it's a forest. It's just one block, and it's blocked off, and it's the final Friday of every month, so from April to October. So I want you guys to imagine being downtown, beautiful weather. We have live music every year or every week, or every time we have it, and then there's food trucks, variety from one end to the other. Those businesses who are on Forest Street, they truly thrive. We have a couple restaurants and an antique store, and the brewery. We were able to make it so they could all be part of it, and it's a really great time. We have 400 to 600 people attend this every time we have it on the final Friday on Forest. So I want to kind of talk about, we have other community or other businesses downtown who want to be a part of this. And so the thought process is, let's expand the common consumption district and allow other communities. You can have other live music at other areas because we really are developing our downtown. And you can cross the street, and my thought process is you have the appropriate signage. I know Great Bend Alive, they're talking about having a crossing guard, so that way they are officially stopping traffic and so forth. And then you can walk from one drink to or one area to another with a drink in your hand. Other areas do this, other states do this all the time. I think this is just a really simple fix. You still do have the common consumption district, and if you walk outside the district with a drink in your hand, then you just broke the law. And I can tell you we don't have that issue in Great Bend. And one thing, and I want to also bring up, is that rural areas, especially in our area, the number one thing we always talk about is quality of life. And many always bring up times that they go to urban areas, and this makes you feel, in my opinion, like you are in an urban area. So it's been very positive. Everybody has really truly enjoyed it in Great Bend, and so I'm just speaking on behalf of my district, but I know that there are other areas in the state of Kansas that also have common consumption districts. So just want to end with, I invite you guys all to come to Great Bend on the final Friday of each month. During the fall time, we actually, if it's an away game, we actually have Wheatland Electric comes with a huge screen, and they play the home football game that we have going on. So everybody can watch the football game and live music and everything. So it's a really great time. But that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you. You were right up against your timeline.
I didn't know there's a timeline. Thank you.
Committee questions. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. I was just wondering, the law as it now exists requires blocking the street, or what's the rationale that was put forth to require that? I'm unsure why that's required now.
Requiring the blocking of the street?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. I just know that one reason why we want to get rid of it is when you start blocking off, then you're blocking off parking. And if there's no parking, no one's going to come down. And when you start blocking off more streets, you're blocking off parking lots. So I don't know the original reasoning behind it, but I'm just saying where we're at with it.
Very good. Thank you. Committee, further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Representative Blue. I've got to get out of there. Okay, next we have Whitney Dameron. Whitney, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Whitney Dameron, appearing on behalf of the city of Topeka. With me today is Amanda Stanley, the city attorney for the city, and you may remember her from the League of Kansas Municipalities. We also have Topeka Police Department Chief Brian Wheels with us today. So if we have technical questions, law enforcement questions, are happy to respond as well. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about this bill. The common consumption area language was adopted in about 2017, I believe. Pretty new concept around the country when that was happening. Most of the time people cited this will be unlike New Orleans, walking up and down the street 24/7 with a drink in your hand and beads around your neck or something like that. And it's like we won't allow that level of chaos in Kansas, but we can do this. Some other states had gone down this path. Colorado had been one that I think people were looking at, some cities over there of how this had been implemented. And so the city of Topeka and some other cities around the state adopted these common consumption areas through ordinances or county resolutions. They've worked well. We've enjoyed the ability to use these in like downtown Topeka and North Topeka that they call NOTO. But it does have some limitations. Topeka is a pretty long stretch of the downtown area. We've had significant investment in restaurants from about 6th Street to 10th Street. If you go up to North Topeka, it's even probably longer than that. Noto area, Kansas Avenue in North Topeka is long and narrow, has a lot of little stores, whether it's bars, restaurants, retail, art galleries. You'll go up there, you'll see concerts and things like that. We have them downtown Topeka as well. So that's what creates a challenge sometimes when we have this investment in downtown Topeka. You might be familiar with, for example, the Iron Rail located around 7th and Kansas Avenue. Across the street, we have the Evergy Plaza. That is been designed to be kind of the gathering spot in Topeka for concerts and the like in the downtown area. Our business owners would like to be able to sell their patrons a beer or a cocktail or something and be able to walk across the street and go to that concert. We can do that if you block off the entirety of the street so that you can't get the traffic, the vehicles into the downtown area, and people have to find other places to park. Representative Blue talked about that. The parking is kind of a key thing here in Kansas. People generally like flat parking. They like it right up in front of the business. They don't like parking garages, and they don't like to walk a few blocks. So we get it. I get it personally. When this started in Kansas, it was kind of a new concept. And so I think people were concerned that if we just open up common consumption and you wander the streets, people would think, well, this whole place is like a park and we'll just cross the street wherever we want. People get run over, the traffic, the cars don't know people are coming and so forth. That has not been the case. That is not the case. The way this process works, quite frankly, is so a sponsor would seek a permit for a common consumption area in Topeka. It might be NOTO in North Topeka, their organizational group. It might be Downtown Topeka Incorporated. They would go to the city council. They would ask for a region, an area to be established as a common consumption area. That would bring in Chief Wheels and his staff, law enforcement, talking about what do we need to do to have crowd control, to have public safety and the like. And restrictions would be placed in ordinance to ensure the public safety. Same thing would happen in North Topeka. Same thing would happen around the state. We think that local units of government have the ability to protect the public safety. They're doing it now with these common consumption areas. The bill allows for appropriate signage and the like. Current law already allows for the way these products are sold to identify the person, the individual, where did you buy that product at? So law enforcement can make determinations if there's underage selling or the violations of alcoholic beverage control licenses. And we think this can be done in a responsible manner. We think it'd be something that the people in Topeka would like. It would encourage people to come downtown. And I would also note that when this legislation or issue was brought before the city council, our mayor's the former chief law enforcement officer for ABC, and at that time, our city manager, interim city manager, was the former Topeka Police Department chief. So we've had that kind of input at the local level. Representative Blue had mentioned perhaps a technical amendment. We've traded some ideas and some language with ABC, who has some concerns over safety. We think they can be addressed at the local level. If it's the will of this committee that we do something additional, we're certainly happy to work with the director and ABC on anything you'd like to see in the bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Very good, Whitney, thank you. Committee questions? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question I have is the law now. I understand what you want to change it to, but what it is now, I'm reading in the bill that a common consumption area permit shall be issued for a period of 1 year. So in this case, is that common? Let's just say, like you gave the example of the Iron Rail and you want to walk across to the park to watch something. Is that always in effect? I mean, if we do this, then they have a permit in that common consumption area, and any time you can walk back and forth, or is the permit specifically for this final Friday? And then what are other signage? I mean, how do people know exactly the boundaries of the common consumption area? I understand when the streets are blocked off, that's probably a little bit easier to understand that. But so 2 questions. Time, it's for a year, is it super specific on this date and this time? And then the signage.
I believe the intent or the way that the city of Topeka would use that, it would be, the permit is for a year, so you didn't have to keep coming back to ABC for a new permit for every first Friday, and that you would have that zone defined. At the local level, they would define when the common consumption area is essentially operational for what kinds of events, and put limitations on that, so it would not be a 24/7, 365-day.
So when you apply
Common
for a
consumption.
permit, and maybe this is a question for Ms. Beavers later, but when you apply for a permit that's going to last a year, you say, we want it on this date and this time and this date and this time. I mean, you're putting out all of the possibilities that you want it
Yeah,
to
in
be a
order for
common
the-
consumption area permitted.
In order for the permit to be implemented at the local level, you have to adopt a city ordinance or a county resolution. And so that's where it becomes operational, and the limitations would be placed at the local level on how that would operate, and
Okay.
the hours and the days and the like.
Mhm. And about the signage, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, and the time blocks.
Uh-huh. What, and as far as boundaries of the consumption area?
Yes, and that would all be included in the ordinance. And then the bill allows for signage as a city or county would deem appropriate to identify where the common consumption area is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whitney, as far as purchasing alcohol beverages, let's say I'm down here at the Iron Rail, there's a concert going on. I buy a couple of beverages, walk across the street and hand one to my underage girlfriend. How do we protect for that? Or have we looked at that?
Well, the bill would require, for example, a special cup that when you purchase an alcohol product, they're checking ID. The way most of the entities operate, it's not in the law, but most of them do something like a wristband where they're checking someone's ID. And if you don't have the appropriate wristband, law enforcement knows that if you're carrying a drink, you haven't been carded, they have obviously probable cause to check the ID of the person, of whether they've lawfully obtained that product.
Okay, you'd answer my question. Thank you.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is in regards to vehicles. If we're talking about eliminating the blocking off of the streets, that means vehicles will be allowed to drive through the open consumption area. Does this bill address the issue of open containers in vehicles within those boundaries, or does it create more law enforcement issues or a workload for that?
Those laws still apply.
They do.
Open containers would not be allowed.
So would we be enforcing that specifically, or like how do we stop people from just doing it like they do in Vegas or?
I would invite, Chief Wheels if he wants to speak to this, but I would say that when we have these kinds of events in downtown Topeka or NOTO law enforcement, Topeka law enforcement is working the crowd and maintaining law and order and the like. And patrons under this bill would be required to use the crosswalks, not crossing in the middle of the streets. And I'm sure if law enforcement saw anyone driving down the street with a red Solo cup that looked like it came from one of the vendors, they would receive their attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Burkham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a couple questions, if I may. I guess one, kind of to his point, how's liability determined? Maybe if somebody would get hit by a car in one of these open areas, is that the city? I guess how would that work?
Well, a city or county has, existing laws about crossing at the crosswalks and jaywalk and things like that. There's a certain assumption of risk when you go to any kind of a public event. The people involved, the businesses involved do have a common law requirement to conduct themselves in a reasonable and safe manner. And so all of those kinds of situations, I think, would be present now or under this bill. So.
And then just one more. So I know it's common for bars to give out cups that have their logos on them, et cetera, but how would it be determined if the patron had drank the beer, but then just went back to their car and filled it up with their own drink. And then they were later on like caught, you know what I mean? Like essentially it wasn't the business's fault that they had beer in their cup, but they still had the cup on them that was full outside the premises of the.
You know, typically you have law enforcement that is paying attention to patrons as they come and go. And I don't see them allowing someone to bring their own alcoholic beverages into a common consumption area or watching people move back and forth and filling their own cups and doing things like that. That, you know, that situation can occur today. It occurs, you know, at softball games or something like that where they say no alcohol allowed on the premises. I guarantee you after the softball games, the coolers of beer are showing up and things like that. And so, I mean, you do the best you can and you apply the laws and you enforce them.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, Whitney, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Next, we have Thomas Underwood, Noto Art and Entertainment District. Thomas, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Thomas Underwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Noto Arts and Entertainment District. I hope that in your time in Topeka, you've had a chance to visit Noto. It's an area of several blocks that has art galleries and unique shops and unique eateries and bars and over 50 pieces of public art. And we also have a couple of green spaces, parks, most notably Redbud Park, which was opened up a couple of years ago, which is a central location for performing art. We have a lot of bands, music, theater groups, those kinds of things. I've been with Noto for a little bit over 5 years, shortly after this law first got passed. I remember attending a meeting early on and talking about how could we possibly implement common consumption. We're talking about downtown, the Noto area, those kinds of things. And the restriction of having to close the street really didn't make it practical. And so while we've had this law and this ordinance in the city for some time, it never really has been something that we could take advantage of, at least in Noto. It just didn't make sense. We didn't want to close the street for some reasons that were stated, and in my written testimony, I offered other reasons why it just really doesn't work for us very well. So Redbud Park, as an example, which is a place where, again, we have music on First Fridays, we have music on our summer concert series, we have special events with music, performing art, but yet you can't purchase a drink from the Wheelbarrow or the Norseman or the 4 or 5 other entities in Noto to enjoy the music with a drink, just because we have that restriction where you can't cross the street. This last spring, I went with the Greater Topeka Partnership to the intercity visit to Northwest Arkansas. And during this time, I visited, we were in Rogers. Rogers is kind of a Noto-esque kind of a place. It's a kind of small area. They have a performing stage where they have concerts, that kind of thing. And guess what? They have common consumption area. And I thought at that time, I was like, gosh, if Rogers, Arkansas can figure this out, we can figure this out. So when I was in Arkansas, I contacted Representative Patton and said, gosh, we need to do something about this. How can we affect this change? Just proposing to make this simple proposal to not mandating street closure will at least create the opportunity. I don't know whether all the businesses in Noto will support this or not. We've had some discussions, pros and cons, from the very issues that some of you have brought up, they've brought up. What's our liability? How do we ensure that people are not going to be sneaking drinks? They're not going to go out to the trunk of their car and filling it up with a can of beer. All those things, they're valid questions. Right now, though, we don't even really have the conversation going because of the restrictions. It doesn't make sense. So I'm requesting that we at least look at the opportunity, and then moving forward and working with the city, we will have to figure out if that ordinance is passed, whether it makes sense for us, whether it makes sense for Noto to move on for an area like this, and whether the business will support it or not. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Committee questions? Seeing none? Thank you. Next, we have Scott Snyder. Scott, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Scott Schneider. I'm the legislative counsel for the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association. This law has been in effect for almost 5 years, a little over 5 years. And when we first started discussing the common consumption area, there was a case in front of the state Supreme Court about liability, alcohol liability within restaurants. And so the biggest defense that my members have is a meaningful framework within the statute to make sure that we understand where the liability rests. And so the common consumption area is something that we broadly wanted to support, but we needed to understand how it's going to work, how the matrix of this is going to work to make sure that these businesses could move forward in a meaningful way. Well, we think it's worked well. We think it's worked exceptionally well in the sense that people want to engage in hospitality in different ways. They want to do some outdoor things, and cities are leaning into it and building events that their citizens enjoy going to. And so how can we continue to think about both the restaurant's liability and to manage a way for the citizens to enjoy outdoor activities. So we think this bill is narrowly tailored. We think it'll meet a meaningful end and accomplish the things that the proponents of it are seeking to accomplish. So with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Committee questions? Seeing none? Very good. Thank you, Scott. Next, we have John Goodyear, League of Municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is John Goodyear, and I am the General Counsel with the League of Kansas Municipalities. Grateful to come before the committee today and to give testimony in support of this legislation. The support of the League and our member cities stems from the fact that this bill is drafted in a way that enhances local choice and local decision-making in this area. The League was approached by the city of Topeka this summer with the idea of House Bill 2059 to have a bill that would modify state law regarding these common consumption areas to allow for traffic within the area. Current state laws, the revisor and as prior conferees have stated mandates that it be closed. This makes this closure permissive, and it shifts that decision over whether or not streets need to be closed to the entity that is responsible for monitoring and policing the area, the city or the county, whatever the case may be. League membership considered this proposal over the summer at our policy committee meetings, and we were directed to add a broad policy statement in support of expanding local control in this area. Local governing bodies are the ones that are well situated to interact with local businesses, to interact with local law enforcement, and make decisions on how best to build out these areas, to monitor these areas, police these areas, and make sure that local laws are being followed. And that to build these areas in a way that reflects the wants and needs of the community while still ensuring compliance with local and state law and maintaining order within their communities. Cities create these common consumption areas by ordinance. They establish the hours at which they operate, the boundaries, the barriers, how they're going to set those up. And cities will utilize this state law to modify those ordinances or create ordinances to create those enforcement mechanisms. They're going to be working with law enforcement to determine what are the wants, needs, how can we ensure compliance, how can we ensure that people aren't going outside these areas and violating otherwise state laws. This doesn't suspend local traffic laws. That's not a concern. That we'll still be able to enforce every single law. That I've heard that question come up, that somehow this would suspend traffic laws and that people would be able to just cross the street wherever. That's not the case. We're still going to have to follow crosswalks. We're still going to have to refrain from jaywalking. Committee, we have cities that are going to take advantage of this legislation. If it passes, they are going to create common consumption areas with open streets. We have cities that are going to keep streets closed. We have cities that are going to do both. They're going to have both kinds of areas. And we have cities that are never going to have common consumption areas. The League supports this bill because it gives local communities that choice. It allows them to determine what is best for their community, what is best for that specific area. And committee, we support House Bill 2059, and we ask that when you make a recommendation, you recommend it favorably. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Very good. Committee questions? Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoy.
I have a question about the other appropriate signage because I have a good vision of what the physical barriers and the lines of demarcation are currently. I know Lenexa City Center was mentioned earlier. They have the blue stars. So for these common consumption areas that would be more spread out going from one to the next, have you had discussions with communities of what their vision is of what that other appropriate signage may be? I'm not sure I'm in the camp that we need to be more specific on what that means, but I do have safety concerns about keeping pedestrian foot traffic and the vehicle traffic as safe as possible.
Sure. Representative, members of the committee. I have not had those conversations yet as to what those will look like. If this legislation moves and it becomes law, it will be recommended that these conversations take place with law enforcement. Let's determine what it is that our community needs. I know that the city of Topeka, heard prior conferee and have spoken with the city of Topeka, they've already started having those discussions. What do we need in our community to make sure that the appropriate signage can clearly demarcate where this area ends, where it begins, and where people need to be when they're taking advantage of these areas. So haven't been involved in those discussions yet. I know some of those discussions are already taking place, but we will make sure that membership knows that what kind of discussions need to take place and what they need to determine as they take a look at expanding their common consumption areas.
Any further questions? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a little bit of clarification. I think you can answer this. The bill says that the secretary shall adopt rules and regulations. That's been in statute. So I'm assuming the Secretary of Administration or no? The Secretary of Revenue does rules and regs. Okay, so I'm assuming that's happened. But just to clarify, you're saying that the counties, the municipalities, those are the ones that will actually do their own rules and do their own, what is this going to look like in our town when they get the permit from ABC, but then it's a specific, they get a 1-year permit.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're saying it's a specific counties, towns, they're the ones that are going to say, what does this actually look like in our town?
Representative and members of the committee. So the state law that created common consumption areas, and this remains unchanged, allows for when cities and counties create common consumption areas by ordinance, by resolution, they create the hours of operation. They create rules for appropriate signage. And once they pass those ordinances, once they pass those resolutions, they send those along. They're required to send them to the director of ABC so that they know that the common consumption area is active, I suppose, and know whether to issue permits or not for that area. Hopefully that answers the question. And I know I also see Mike talking to you.
Yeah,
So
just wanted some clarification. Thank you.
of course.
Very good. Committee, further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the risk of drawing this out, what I haven't heard is anybody talk about this from a law enforcement perspective. Whether it's an anecdotal observation, will this have any impact on law enforcement if this is enacted?
And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and not coming from a law enforcement background, but working with cities that have law enforcement, heavily going to encourage cities to work with law enforcement to make sure that they are creating these areas in a way that law enforcement is comfortable with and that they can enforce local laws. So it's going to have an effect to the extent that we need to have those discussions and we need to make these areas work for law enforcement. So just making sure that we're engaging those individuals, but to say that I know the exact effects that it'll have on law enforcement, I can't say that. I know we do have a law enforcement official in the room from a prior conferee, but I haven't engaged that yet. But I know that some cities have, and that their law enforcement concerns are being addressed at the local level.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other quick question about law enforcement. If we remove the requirement to block off the roads and it's a little more ill-defined, it seems there might be more requirement for law enforcement. Do some of the cities and counties require safety officers that they, security officers that they purchase, or are there other means to help the law enforcement through private security required by this statute? Thank you.
Representative members of the committee, I'm not sure. And that's a decision that would need to be made at the local level to determine what the needs are for the area. Like when the city of Great Bend has their event, when the city of Topeka has events where they have current common consumption areas, they know what the law enforcement footprint is required to monitor and police those areas. It's going to be a matter of taking a look at those and seeing what is needed with this expansion. So it's something that will need to be assessed and determined at the local level.
Committee, further questions? Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the chair permits, could we have the chief step up and maybe address a couple of these questions?
Yeah, that's fine. State your name and where you're from.
Chief Brian Wheelis, Topeka, Kansas Police Department. I've been the chief for a little almost 3 years now, and I've been with the department for 30. Just to answer, I mean, you can ask questions, or I can answer some of the questions that I've heard.
Why don't you answer some of the questions you've heard said?
I'm very confident from a local level with my experience that we can deal with these public safety concerns and balance the economic development concerns and the living condition concerns, the entertainment values. And I say that because we've been doing it for several years at the local level. Noto, downtown Topeka, for lots of years now have had events. I understand the concerns about blocking the streets off because that's what it's been. We haven't seen that be a big issue. The other question I think I heard was, yes, all of those are available for an event. Private security, in addition to local law enforcement, layered approach depending on the size of the event and the specific nature of the event. Those are the kind of things that we work through on a very normal basis. So depending on the event, it can have local law enforcement components, private security companies, off-duty police officers hired by private entities is also an available thing that we have as well. I think I caught everything.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Committee, further questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing on 2059. Oh, yeah. And I do want to bring your attention to written proponents, Jay Hall, Kansas Association of Counties, Stuart Little, Cities of Merriam and Mission, Curtis Snedden, Greater Topeka Chamber of Commerce, and Neutral, Debbie Beavers.
I think she's.
Oh, okay. Who wants to speak? Oh, Debbie. I'm sorry. Come on up. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Debbie Beavers, ABC Director. We are neutral on this bill. We do have some safety concerns, public safety with people wandering around through the streets and moving traffic. Just to give you, I think it would be helpful if I could give you a little bit of history about this bill. ABC was part of the original group that worked to formulate this language and worked with various entities and cities that were interested in doing a common consumption area. We currently have 23 common consumption permits in the state, and I can tell you not one of the events operates like another event. And it makes it very difficult from our perspective. Local control has been the emphasis for this common consumption when the legislation initially passed, and that's great. These permits are for a year. Many times the city will be the permit holder, but that permit is valid for a full year. Sometimes the resolution or ordinance that comes with the permit application specifies it's going to be every Friday, May through October, whatever. Some of them require whoever wants to have an event on the street has to then go to the city council to get that event approved. So it makes it difficult to understand when a permit is actively in use and when it's not. It's much easier when the streets are closed because you clearly know that. We have been in discussions with some of the folks about some things that would perhaps be helpful for us. But I can tell you that these permits are not used in any way, shape, or form the way ABC envisioned it initially. We have some events where they get a common consumption permit and they use it for one day to have an event, and then they surrender their permit. They don't keep it for the whole year because it allows them to do something they couldn't do otherwise without that permit. So I hope that information is a little bit helpful for you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Debbie, thank you for being here. Honestly, when I was reading the bill, that one thing that threw me, and I'm very supportive of this type of legislation, as you know, but was other appropriate signage. Knowing myself as well as I do, I can go into a store and stand underneath a huge sign that says milk and ask where the milk is because I'm totally that guy. Right. And so I know that we have Blue Stars and the common consumption area in Lenexa, but I would like to see, I don't know if you can work with the proponents of the bill to come up with a way to tighten the definition of appropriate. Sometimes we might see things stamped on concrete. Well, I'm not going to look there, of course, whatever. But in any case, so I think that if there is some sort of standard for what appropriate would be considered so that it's easily viewed, then maybe we can kind of come to an agreement and potentially could work on that. But that's kind of, what are your thoughts on this? What would appropriate be?
Thank you for that. I think that is one of our concerns that we have also stated. If it's not clearly defined, it makes it very difficult to be enforceable. So I think that some language could be agreed upon, but it needs to be more tight than other appropriate signage.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So talking about liability, would liability then, you guys wouldn't have any part of that. That would fall, two questions, by the way, if you don't mind. That would fall at the local level and the local entities, right? That's my assumption. And then my second question would be, we have the baseline of this bill, so wouldn't it be more appropriate for when the locals permit these events, they get more specific as far as what you're discussing for the safety precautions and the boundaries? I feel like that should be left up to the locals to report back to you all versus putting that in the bill. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Certainly. We do agree that we'd like to see a little bit tighter language. I think one of the things that was brought up earlier is like going to your car and refilling a drink. That's not an issue now because the streets are closed and you can't take your container outside of that area because it's clearly defined.
And the liability part?
The liability is the permit holder is going to be liable for people exiting. And then any licensee that is participating in that event, if someone is walking around with a cup that has their logo on it that's marked, and we find that they're underage, that licensee will be liable for that violation. One of the things they can do to mitigate risks on things like that is to have like trash cans that you can't reach back in and pull a cup out, because that's something that can be done if an underage is wanting to possess alcohol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Representative Hassford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for me, what comes to my mind about the concerns of the appropriate signage is there's nothing about like the sign needs to be reflective during nighttime. Our lights blinkering. I know maybe some towns don't have the staff of law enforcement or the budget to hire folks to stand at these boundaries. So what is the consequences if someone, if we don't properly define a lot of these rules and dimensions and they lose their license? How long is that consequences? Do they lose their license for, or the opportunity for a license for 1 to 2, 3 years?
We have a fine schedule that's adopted by regulation, so it's progressive disciplinary action. So it would take some time to get to the point where the license was revoked. So we have not had anything like that happen, but once the license revoked, you can never hold a license again in the state of Kansas. So another entity could then apply for a license at that point.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, my microphone, I thought I pushed that button. Sorry, committee, we will work these bills next week. Be ready, have your amendments ready if you so desire. And so be ready next week to work these bills. So with that, we're adjourned.